Ford's first foray into the United Kingdom was way back in 1903, with imports of the Model A.
From the beginning, there seemed to have been two strands in car making. There were the people who were making horseless carriages for the rich, loading them down, making them heavy and luxurious. And then there was Henry Ford, who had this idea that a car should be able to go along the rutted tracks. It should be able to drive across a ploughed field. A farmer should be able to use it and take a wheel off it and fix a chain to it and cut some trees down or husk some corn. That was all he was interested in from the start.
6 years later, in 1909, the Ford Motor Company Limited was established, first dealership opening a year later in Southampton. A few years after the 1910 opening of the Southampton dealership, Henry Ford opened his first factory outside of America, here at Trafford Park in Manchester. With direct access to the sea via the shipping canal, parts could be brought in and out of the country easily, and also cars could be exported from there into Europe. The factory at Trafford Park was mainly to build Ford Model Ts, and this continued for quite some time. By the outbreak of the Great War in 1914, around 30% of all vehicles registered on British roads were Ford Model Ts. By 1919, with Trafford Park having been expanded, now using Ford's moving production lines, Ford had 41% of the British car market and was producing vehicles at the rate of 21 per hour, which at the time was staggering. In 1929, construction started on the Dagenham vehicle plant. This was going to be Europe's biggest car plant. Unlike Trafford Park, though, it was supplied by a deep seaport rather than Britain's ageing canal network. And in October 1931, Britain and Europe's largest car plant opened, producing the Model AA truck and the Model A car. This was at the height of the Depression, and the Model A was too expensive to tax and run in Britain. Very few were sold, only 5 in the first 3 months. A smaller car was urgently needed, and this came in 1932 with the 933cc Model Y, a car much more suited to the market, and becoming in 1935 Britain's first £100 car. Adjusting that for inflation, it would be around about £7,000 today. This was Ford's first car specifically designed for sale outside North America between 1932 and 1937. Over 157,000 were made at Dagenham and Ford's other plant in Cork. But it was the decades after the Second World War where Ford began to take off in the UK. While the British government tried to create a motor manufacturing giant under the British Motor Corporation, which became known as BMC, Ford soldiered on in creating products for specific markets. BMC was an amalgamation of several British motor manufacturers, but rather than having brands concentrate on one market sector as Ford was doing with their products, BMC had similar cars, sometimes the same cars, sold by different brands in dealerships that were often so close together you could see them all on the same street. Buying a Ford was far simpler, and often a more reliable option. By the mid-1970s, BMC had become British Leyland and amalgamated the remaining large British car manufacturers under the brand. Yet, they were still losing market share, mainly to Ford. In 1976, Ford's strategy of cars for each sector was paying off. For the younger driver, there was the new Fiesta. For the aspiring family man, there was the Escort. For the mobile executive, there was the Cortina, while the managers could have the Granada. The sporty man about town could have the Capri, while the bank robber had the ever-faithful Transit. Ford had a car for everyone, and every street had a Ford or two on it at least, if not more. Whenever Ford had trouble selling a car, though, it would turn to the world of motorsport, where cars like the Escort performed in various sporting fields. This brought people into the showrooms and also got them to buy cars. As the years progressed, the Cortina became the Sierra, a car initially mocked and nicknamed the Jelly Mold, while the Granada became the gorgeous Granada Scorpio hatchback. The Fiesta was joined by the Ka, which was the smallest and cheapest Ford available. While the ever-faithful Transit continued to provide service to bank robbers, the Capri was sadly gone by 1982, replaced with the hot hatch cars including the XR2 Fiesta, the XR3i Escort, and the short-lived XR4 and XR 4x4 Sierra. But the king of the hill was the Sierra Cosworth. But by the mid-90s, it was all change again. The Granada Scorpio became the gopping ugly Scorpio. The Sierra became the Mondeo, and the Escort became, well, bigger. Along with the Fiesta, which also got bigger, almost as big as the Mark III and IV Ford Escort was. Yet, by the end of the 90s, the Escort became the Focus. And a couple of niche cars were released. The Puma, based on the Ford Fiesta platform, borrowing a few bits from the car, and the Cougar, making the Mondeo floor plan into a sporty coupe. Ford also owned Mazda, along with Jaguar. And after a few mishaps with re-engineering the XR series and rebuilding the Fiesta as the Mazda 121, they released the S-Type Jaguar. We won't, though, mention the Ford Probe. Ford was at its peak. It seemed nothing could stop the company after buying Land Rover from BMW. The financial crisis, though, hit in 2008, and this would be devastating for Ford all across its empire. While it kept Mazda, Jaguar and Land Rover were sold to Tata in India, who took over the factories and the existing inventory and made a success of the new Jaguar Land Rover company. For Ford, plants were closed and scaled down. Dagenham, once Europe's largest car plant, stood mostly idle. Today, the plant doesn't exist at all. Ford, though, had to do this to survive. Like General Motors, they were so reliant on credit, the size of their debt burden was threatening the company's very survival. But while the company survived the storm, it was the self-inflicted damage in the years following that caused the mess that Ford find themselves in today. Ford's original plan was to have a vehicle for everyone, and that had worked between 1976 and 2000. Today, Ford still has that mantra, but today there are over 20 vehicles, each with their own range of models and options, mainly cannibalizing other cars' sales within the Ford range. And that's before you even look at Mazda, with their cars based on the same Ford platforms and using many of Ford's parts. A seemingly endless range of vehicles, each with options for far more powerful specialist versions such as the ST line and the ST versions of the Fiesta and Focus, ST line options in the SUVs, top-of-the-line Titanium X models, along with entry-level vehicles with fewer creature comforts as standard. The same mistakes BMC and British Leyland made in the 1960s through to the early 1980s are being repeated here by Ford today, with very similar results. The Mondeo is on borrowed time across the world. Ford is selling cars, but it's not enough on each model to sustain itself in the long run. Having launched range upon range in a contracting car market. In North America, for example, Ford are concentrating on making SUVs, pickups and the Mustang, while the Contour, which we know as the Mondeo, will be phased out along with other non-SUV vehicles by 2020. With the recent announcements of the Bridgend factory closure, it seems inevitable that all production in the UK will cease at some point. In 2013, over a century of Ford vehicle manufacturing in the UK ended with the closure of the Southampton plant. The manufacturing of the next generation Transit moved over to the Ford plant in Turkey.
We also plan to close in 2013 two facilities in the UK. A vehicle assembly plant in Southampton, currently building Transit, as well as stamping and tooling operations in Dagenham. Transit production will be consolidated in Kocaeli, Turkey.
So what's actually gone wrong? Well, too many cars in a shrinking market, with more competitors able to make similar or better cars at similar or lower prices. The used car market is booming with great quality used Fords available at a price point people are more comfortable with, which may well have been Ford's rationale with the new Focus coming out at a much lower price point than the model it replaced. Minimal development costs for the Mark 8 Fiesta by using the Mark 7 underpinnings, but moving the B-pillars, give it a slight change in proportions and a rounding off of the Mark 7 Fiesta wheel arch trim. By offering a vehicle for every possible taste, they've lost the simplicity that made choosing a Ford an easy option. by replacing the simple choices with an ever-confusing range of cars and options that overlap, making people look elsewhere. And after issues with the Mark III Ford Focus RS, the 1-litre EcoBoost engine issues, and fires in some 1.6-litre EcoBoost engines, the cost of repairs and compensation has hit Ford hard worldwide. Also, issues around the PowerShift dual-clutch gearbox have Ford facing legal action by consumer protection groups. First, it was the ACCC in Australia, with others soon to follow. Ford may have survived the 2008 financial storms, but the next 10 years may well be crucial to Ford's very survival.